start. Impossible to to limit his time of presentation, so it's very easy. So a good advice, take Jim as a speaker, and you will see he worked a lot on his slides. You will receive a lot of information, and thank you very much, Jim. So you have the floor.
Okay, well, thank you, Bertrand, for that dubious introduction. I now intend to spend the next 4 or 5 hours talking about a realistic roadmap for our industry. I should say to you, those of you that aren't native English speakers, I should explain that I'm Scottish, right? And therefore my accent, you know, I struggle with English. And I remember many years ago, we were in Istanbul, and I'd only recently met Bertrand, and he said to one of our friends, "Isn't it interesting that the Turks speak really good English? I just wish Jim could speak English like the Turks." So, and we've been friends ever since, I have to say. So traditional media are failing to maximize their opportunity in digital. Over 50% of media revenues are from content, but not for news media. 15.5% of global advertising revenues are in digital, but only 6% of news media revenues. News media are great opportunity generators. Use this one. That's my second row for today. But they are, to date, not digital revenue generators. And I think that will be the experience of just about everybody in this room. Looking at global media consumption trends, and these figures are from World Press Trends, what one can see is that in the last 2 years, the amount of time spent consuming media has actually declined slightly, which I thought was rather surprising. But I've seen that in 2 or 3 different sources. And you can see there that television, the top line, takes the biggest share. Then radio has taken the next, and then internet the next. And in fact, print media, in terms of the time spent with the medium, take relatively little. And in terms of share, what one sees here is that radio is the big loser. Radio is the industry that people are moving away from. Largely, I suspect, because people are now listening to radio on their laptops just whilst they're working and listening to iTunes and so on. And the big gainer, no surprise, has been the internet. But let's be clear here, newspapers are not exactly dying a death. You know, I keep reading about this, and it's not the case. So my analysis is that worldwide, time spent consuming media has declined. Radio, as I said, TV increasing share, but people aren't spending more time watching the television. And the internet time consumed is leveling off. People are not spending more time on the internet. Even though they now have iPads and phones and all of this, they're not actually spending any more time surfing than they did before. And as Christoph Reich said in the WAN conference in Vienna, print consumption is rising in the East and setting in the West. And that is, you know, just a fact of life, and we have to live with that. And the other final point here, there is no evidence anywhere that the internet is the cause of circulation decline. Now people, I've been criticized, I've had magazine articles writing about me saying what an idiot I am, and every time I write back and I say, show me the proof. Show me the proof, let's see the math, and it doesn't exist. And every analyst I know in this business, and I know a lot, have exactly the same view as I have. The internet is not the cause of circulation decline. Sorry, this slide, this is Microsoft's problem. This is the difference between a Mac and a PC. But if you look at the relative media consumption, right, that's the number of people in the world, 7 billion. And of them, about 0.7 of a billion are broadband subscribers. Of them, just under 2 billion are internet users. In terms of reading a newspaper on an average day, and this is only daily newspapers, it doesn't account for weeklies and all these other things, right? On an average day, it's about 2.3 billion. And if you take into account the cumulative effect across a week, it's 3.4 billion. In terms of television viewing, it's very difficult to work out exactly how many people watch the television, right? But during the Beijing Olympics, the figure reached 4.8 billion. That was the highest figure ever recorded for television viewing, right? And then when you come to mobile, well, there's the figure there. It's 5.6 billion people are mobile users, but of them, and I see Francois furiously taking a photograph here of the slide. You get the slides later. Relax. Right? But of mobile phone users, only 1.5 billion of them have 3G, are able to access content. Right? So when you look at that, you know, I'm an old newspaper man. I started in this business in 1976. And you look at that, I don't think newspapers are doing that badly, really. Okay, and one other thing is that media choice is directly related to wealth. If you're a rich country, you read a lot of newspapers, right? If you're a wealthy person, you read a lot of print, a lot of text. And so what you see is that print is for smart people, and it's interesting because a lot of countries, particularly Eastern European countries, people are well educated but poor, and they still have relatively high print levels. Readership levels. Television, I'm afraid to say, is a poor person's medium. Right? It's absolutely the case. The poorer you are, the more time you have to sit at home and watch soap operas. And that's a fact of life, and it's true at a macro level and economically, and it's true at a micro level within society. And the internet is a young person's medium. It's youth-focused. People are more promiscuous, and increasingly, and I think really interestingly, it's a female medium. And when you say to yourself that 80% of household purchasing decisions are made by women, you know, the importance of women is really, really strong. And another thing I've noticed is that I did a study a few years ago of the 20 most successful newspapers in the world, and of them, 17 had far more female readers than male readers. And that's really unusual. Women are really quite an important thing. Can I just add, in my household, 100% of decisions are made by my wife. So, forecasts show that by 2017, mobile will deliver around 24% of all digital advertising. Mobile is a game changer in this business. And the forecasts are wrong, because I'll tell you why. I think it's going to be far higher than that. Because what we're seeing happening, and in countries like China, India, but around the world, fixed internet, if I can call it that, internet that you get off a thing with a keyboard, right, that has reached its plateau in terms of audience, the number of people using it. You know, okay, so a few more people might be rich enough to buy a $200 laptop, but that's it. But what's happening now is that mobile is accelerating dramatically relative to the PC. And this is about where we are today. So we're going to see a big, big change. I won't dwell on this, but I do think that mobile is a second evolution. You know, you walk into the hotel, you plug in your laptop or your phone, you've got wireless access instantly. You don't have to go to one of these robbing phone companies that are going to rip you off. You can just get on, right? And that's made a big change. It's locational. You can go into a shopping center and receive a message from a shop saying, come on in, we've got shirts at half price, even in your size, Jim. You can get multimedia search, so you can, you know, work across a range of platforms. It's transactive. You know, you can book tickets, you can buy goods, and we're now seeing, and now, of course, there's all the issues with e-readers, iPads, and so on. And if you look at the growth in e-readers, these figures from eMarketer, a really cute little site. It's all American data, by the way, but it's all free and quite interesting. You can see the growth in the number of e-readers is absolutely enormous.
What you call e-readers,
Tablets, yeah. Thank you for that clarification. Sorry. Good translation. It's interesting, Amazon report that 1 in 3 of their books, if available digitally, are sold digitally. I think that's an enormous statistic. And Le Monde were telling me recently that people, generally, I'll go on to show this, the problem we have is that if you look at the newspaper on the internet, reading times are very thin, but Le Monde are saying that people who are reading the newspaper on an iPad read it for just about as long as they read it in print. American publishers have told me that their conversion retention levels, if they sell the paper for a tablet, then they are higher than in print. And there was a German study recently. I have the author, but I just don't have it here. But the German study recently found that older people are reading faster on an iPad than younger people. Now, they've recorded this using a range of methodologies, but I think that's really very interesting in terms of it sort of goes against what one would think would happen. Revenue, these are press figures, but the figures are exactly the same for digital. The reality is very little money is coming from digital. And I'm quite critical of a lot of the output in our industry. It's almost as if print doesn't exist anymore. Bertrand can help me with translation. I don't know if any of you remember a word. It was decades ago. There was a word in our business. I think it was circulation. Do you remember? Yeah, you remember it as well. You've got a grey beard, so I know you're on my side. But there was this thing, circulation. When was the last time you went to a conference and heard about circulation? Right? The people that are in circulation they're sent down into the cellar. They're never allowed out. They're deprived of daylight or a razor. But yet, circulation is an enormous proportion of our revenue of our business. It's been forgotten. And all we're spending our lives on, everybody is absolutely obsessed with that tiny little bit up there. And I don't know if you can see there's a yellow line. You just see that? That yellow line? That's revenue from content, right? So that's revenue from print circulation, and that's revenue from content, right? So I think there's something a bit wonky. And what's damaging about this is that because of everybody's mindset, the reason this is going down is because nobody cares. It's finished, it's in the cellar, throw them raw meat once a day, and they'll keep things going, and nobody cares. And I think it's a really, really serious problem that we have. This graph I drew one day when I was on hallucinogenic materials. But what it basically shows is exactly the same thing about advertising as you see for readership. The wealthier the country, the lower the dependency on advertising revenue. The wealthier the country, the higher the revenue, in television. The wealthier the country, the higher the proportion of revenue that is in newspapers. So here what we're looking at, these are places like Norway and Sweden, cold places. Right? But I think it's really important because if you're an advertiser, if you're wanting to reach rich people, print is the medium on the internet. And it is the same at a microeconomic level as it is at a macroeconomic level. You're shaking your head, or is that just to try and keep awake? So what we see in emerging countries is that television is far stronger, and that tends to be for a number of reasons, not just social, but also economic. And here is the chart for South America, Asia Pacific. This is just that little slice of the chart. And what's interesting is how Vietnam and the Philippines, very, very strong, dominant in TV relative to where you'd expect them to be, which is the red line. Hong Kong, incredibly strong in print, reflecting, I think, the history of the country and how the media have evolved. Taiwan, very low in terms of press. Australia, relatively high in terms of television and in press. Singapore, surprisingly, rather low in terms of internet. Right, here's a game. We'll play this. This will fill an hour, I think. So what I did here was I took, these are figures for the UK, and I said, how much money is spent in advertising in each of these 4 media? Right, so there's a big number. And then I said, and how much time do people devote to that medium? Right? So we all know that people spend about 3 hours a day watching the television. They spend about 30 minutes reading a newspaper in general. So I divided the money by the time to work out how much advertising was thrown at people in the time they spent with the medium. So would anybody like to hazard a guess about television? I thought so, all cowards. Right? There we are. £4.2 million is spent per hour that the British people consume television. Right? So what do you reckon radio is, higher or lower? We've got one related to time. You think higher, right? Good. And there was a sort of grunting lower around the sort of, no? So who thinks lower? Who thinks higher? Who wants to go for lunch? Right. Radio's 1.2. How about the internet? Higher or lower than the other two? Lower. Right, okay, who thinks lower? Who thinks higher? Who doesn't care? Interesting. The internet's a mature medium. Right, and how about the newspapers? Lower or higher? Much higher? Much lower? Who thinks lower?
About the same like television.
About the same like television. I like your confidence, sir. Right? Okay, so who thinks higher? Who thinks lower? Okay. Who thinks a lot higher? What? You want me to stop? Interesting, isn't it? So I just say to you, there's a lot of people out there. I'm a passionate newspaper man, but I just think that that's quite interesting. It tells you a lot about what advertisers think. So why won't consumers pay for content? Well, the truth is, they do. They pay for sport, finance, entertainment, and pornography. At least certainly I do. And the content share of total media revenues is growing, while advertising share is shrinking. The amount of money that media companies are making from content as opposed to advertising is going up. Advertising share is not. So why won't they pay for news? Well, this is an analysis of the population. 57% of the people who read newspapers or websites, that's called a typing mistake by me, read a newspaper. And the number of times they visit in a month is about 15. People aren't automatons. They don't read their newspaper every day. Even if they're subscribers, they don't read the paper every day. The minutes per visit, about 25. The pages per visit, about 40. And the unique visitors, as a percentage of all readers, about 78%. So let's look at the digital world. Well, first of all, a smaller proportion of the population look at newspapers on the web. The number of visits per month is only 8.6. The number of minutes is 4.1. The number of pages is a quarter of what it is in print. And the unique visitors, as a percentage of them all, is about 30%. Right? I get the IHT delivered to my home every day, and I read it. I love it. I think it's just great. And I probably read it for about half an hour. I probably spend half an hour on the web looking at news. I go straight in to Google News. That's my source of news first thing in the morning, because I'm brand-free. And I probably visit, in those 30 minutes, 7 or 8 sites. And I don't think I may be in the media, but I don't think I'm untypical. I think that's the problem, and that is the primary reason why pay models will not work. Did I say that? Will not work. The Times model has failed I predicted it would fail 6 months before they launched it. The multiplier result, when you do the geometric effect of all these calculations, right? When you sort of multiply them all up, it gives you an index of 263 here. Right? Here, it gives you an index of 13. Right? Now, what's interesting about that is that is 5% of that. Do you remember the figures I showed earlier about where the revenue comes from? Yes? In truth, digital revenues in news media account for 6% of total revenue. And certainly when I was at school, 6% and 5% were quite close to each other. Right? It is no coincidence that newspapers get 6% of the media. And by the way, TV websites are just the same, because that's the relative multiplier, the ratio between the two in terms of impact. Internet news intensity is 5% of print. Publishers make 6% of revenues from digital. Right? We've got to get over that and realize these are facts. If we then say, well, what happens if I do something incremental, if I improve things? So I'm improving each of my points by 1, by 2, by 5, by 10. Even if I increase everything by 10, it only takes me to 87.6. Now, 87.6, and all I've done is increase everything by 10. You could say that's not a lot to do. It's still, 6, 7 times that, but it's still way behind that. But the challenge that we all have in this room is how, in a world which is moving digital, how do we make these increments work? Yes, sir?
Can I ask a question about the previous sheet, please?
Yep.
Because I'm not sure if I understand one thing.
That's good. You don't need to understand it. Just enjoy it.
I'm from Holland. We're always a bit... I don't think I understand. Because you said you spend 4.1, if we take you as an example, minutes on a site.
Yes.
But you said you just check 7 or 8 sites.
Yep.
So do you then have to multiply the 4.1 by 7 or 8 and then also the 5%? Because then you come to a different business model.
That actually is an extremely good question. You know you're in trouble when the questions are more interesting than the answers. Well, no, you're absolutely right. And there is a very big argument, and I've been told by my friends in the British trade associations that I must not say what I'm about to say, because what I'm about to say is in Britain regarded as illegal. Right? Most things in Britain these days are illegal. But I said at a conference 2 years ago that the simple thing was to set up an online newsstand, and all newspapers go onto the online newsstand, and the French have tried this, of course. And everybody competes in the online newsstand. And Google, we'll come to Peter in a minute, but Google have suggested just such a model. So if you make the newspaper only available in the newsstand, right, and then you can pay for it, because you can then say, well, I'll only have the sport from one newspaper, but I'll have the business from another, and then your point, which is a very good one, is absolutely the case. But that people can then can rent space in the newsstand. But I was told, this is the truth, somebody came up to me afterwards and said, you must not say that. We are told that if in a committee meeting we discuss the idea, we are breaking the law. I mean, what is that? So, of course, the next conference I went to, I said exactly the same thing. Because it's lunacy. But nobody says when you go into a newsstand to buy a paper that that's monopolistic. That's just a fact. You don't say, I'm demanding a newspaper that's not in a newsstand. That's a fact. So why can't that be the fact in the online environment? And that is the only way that pay is going to work online. If everybody works together and the only place you can go is into a competitive marketplace. So traditional news media are attracting consumers, but they don't hang around because they go off to somewhere else and they don't come back. Traditional media are generating the digital revenues they deserve. Right? Live with it. The reality is that unless traditional news media adopt a scientific approach to customer retention and intensity, they're dead. We're dead. I'll be dead quite soon anyway, because I'm very old. But for the rest of you, you know. And I think the time has come, and journalists hate it when I say this, we have to be obsessive about analytics. Because if you see the way those multipliers worked along that line, you don't have to do very much in each of the touch points for it to make an enormous geometric difference in terms of the inventory that you have available in terms of advertising. And so there's no more editorial ivory towers. I'm sorry, guys, you're all going to have to be run by statisticians like me. Change isn't any, or it's the norm. And the trends towards personalization and targeting will lead to an integration of systems. And Peter, we were talking last night about how these analytics work, and of course Google are the people at it. Do you want to just say a quick word about what you're doing? The guy's going to give you a microphone because he's been briefed. No,
I wasn't going to talk in any detail at all, except to say that, yes, as you rightly say, analytics should be an intimate part of every newspaper editor's armory. And I'm not sure how, it would be interesting to take a sort of straw poll here, how many people regularly consult the analytics of their newspaper website. Should we just, how many of you regularly do so? Well, that's not bad. I suppose the point really is, I think that, that these tools are readily available to anyone, to any online business, and can give you a fantastic amount of detail about where your readers, your customers are coming from, and where indeed they're dropping off in the chain, where they take their basket up to the checkout and then fail to convert that into a sale. So really just to emphasize the point that you're making, the analytics is very, very widely available now, fantastic detail. Everybody in the newspaper industry should be taking full advantage of it.
Okay, thank you. And the great thing about this is that if you, with very simple things, just asking people to give you their name, for example, then you suddenly know exactly what they're doing. And then using cluster analysis, which we call it, it's an aspect of taxonomy in mathematics, you can then define different user types and predict very easily that if this person wants to read that particular article, they're very likely to want that particular article. And so suddenly, you can serve people, and I've got a project on the go about this at the moment, you can serve people content, and you can say to them, do you want us to define what you want to read? Do you want us to give you the editor's choice, or do you want us to tailor your content according to what we think you like because of our analysis of you and people like you? And we have a triangle which you can push the button into whichever area you want. Because a lot of people, the great thing about a newspaper and television is it's sort of random content in a fixed format. You know that you've got 48 pages of this: home news, foreign news, business, leader, sport. But you don't exactly know what's going to be in there. And the problem with the internet is it's very hard to navigate. And when you study the behavioral patterns of the eye in particular, it makes things very difficult.
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
3
right?
minutes.
Okay, so I've got to do 200 slides in 3 minutes. Yeah, okay. So readability is the primary challenge of websites. And I don't think we've sorted that yet. I think there's some way to go. These are just a few of my favorite sites. Complexity of a page. This one, you notice, is quite simple. This one, this is a great, great website, Aftonbladet. But it's really quite complicated for the eye to read that. And the more complex the pages, the more the eye gets confused, and the less it picks up on things. And it's interesting, I think the CNN site is a particularly friendly site to navigate. And the web presentation removes the concept of serendipity. And I think the Mail, this has been an extraordinary success, the Mail Online. But what is interesting about it is all of this is stories saying, if you're a woman, read me. If you're a woman, read me. And of course, the Mail in 1969 took on a strategy which was very female-dominated. And they introduced the tagline, every woman needs her Daily Mail. And they still use it. Their strategy has not changed one jot in 30 years, 40 years. Right? And again, it's actually rather simple to watch. And then the listing of headlines does not equate to attractiveness. And you do see these panels where it says, most read, most commented on, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't actually necessarily appeal to me. So I think it's, just finally here, what we need to do is consider how we communicate, what our content is, what our communication is, and what happens in terms of our readers and advertisers. And how do we deliver the consumer's content? How do we target our message? How do we position, and what is the most appropriate form of communication? There is not such a thing as a converged advertiser. I hate the word convergence. It's a basket case of a word, because it doesn't exist. The world is diverged. And so what I'm saying here is that what you can do is, and what Google have done magnificently, is you have a box which is full of analytics. And it tells you who reads what, where, why, when, and what people come back to. And by installing that box, that is what's going to transform the news media industry. And without it, it's going to be very, very difficult to survive. So the multiplier is saying an ad on a page delivers 12 times more than this page. It's saying readers of X are also interested in Y. It's saying viewers of M come twice as frequently if. It says a click to this ad is worth $53, but to this one it's only worth a few cents. And viewers of K prefer, and we know why. And this is not difficult. It might be difficult, if you've got a degree in history, but there's a mathematician along the corridor who can probably help you. And don't confuse mathematicians with accountants, by the way. Right? And shoppers at A also visit B. So all of you have all of this in your database. You can all do this. This is not difficult. So tailored content will dramatically transform the industry. More frequent users, higher page views, targeting advertisers, and better charging models. And it's all in a box, and you can see all of this are the benefits, and it's a fact. All the knowledge exists, you all have it. Media consumers want a better way to navigate their content. Media communicators want a better way to target their potential prospects. The only barrier to taking traditional into the new world is ourselves, which is quite easy, really. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. You didn't have to specify that you were obsessed by analytics and figures. It was obvious. So don't say that next time. First question. Come here. Microphones.
It's a very quick question. Jim, tell us why you spend half an hour every day on the Herald Tribune as a paper.
I started reading it when I was living in France.
Here. Closer.
Closer. It's a version of the New York Times, of course. But I just think it's a very good read. And all these guys like Paul Krugman and Maureen Dowd that write for it, these are some of the best writers in the world. And it gives a very international perspective. So I think it's good. I think it's slightly sad it moved away from, it was once a global newspaper, and they made the strategic decision that it would be a global version of the New York Times rather than a global newspaper in itself. But no, fair enough.
The question: Why not on a tablet? Why not on a tablet?
Well, I don't own a tablet, which makes it slightly harder. But I don't know. Listen, it's unlike you. I'm old.
It's Christmas time. Ask your wife.
No, because she'll then say, "But I want one." No, I think it's interesting. And I once walked up a hill in Norway. And the reason was there was a bar at the top of the hill. Right? And I got chatting to this guy next to me, right? And he was the head of what became blue screen, or whatever they call it, technology for Sony. He was the master of screens for Sony. And he said to me that they'd done a lot of research about readability, and people would never be as comfortable reading on a tablet, on a screen, as they are on a piece of paper. And that was the guy from Sony said that to me. He also said to me, please don't tell anybody you said that, but you know, if he's going to speak to a newspaper man, that's a bit dumb. That's particularly a British one. But I now believe that that is wrong, and I mentioned the case with Le Monde. So, you know, it is there, but I don't. I like to read a paper.
Here, one question, and then here, and then here.
Jim, I'm Caroline Brun. I was very interested, of course, in the content of your conference. And if I can sum up, you say we pass much time on websites and so on, and the revenues are very low. We pass few time on print, and the revenues are dramatically high. But why do you conclude that definitely print is dead? Maybe the irrational thing is that print is not dead.
I didn't, well, what I said was if we didn't adopt new practices, the industry would be dead. I personally don't think print will be dead ever. You know, I've done forecasts in many countries. I've done 2 forecasts for the Newspaper Association of America, long-term forecasts. And I believe the medium will remain viable for a very long time. But what I also think is that because of our reluctance to take on board this concept of analytics, that is what's holding back our ability to develop our digital businesses. We're not exploiting the medium in the way that the medium is there to be exploited. I mean, the guys at Google didn't come from anywhere else, so they had no preconceived ideas. In the traditional news media business, broadcast, print, we're still hanging on to these old ideas rather than, if you like, letting science take more of control. Now, I realize that we're an emotional, creative industry, and we have to keep that. But I don't think print is dead, but I think we're not going to solve the digital issue unless we take on the key issues of what makes digital work.
I think here, and it will be the last question from Same, where you had elections and thing. So,
hi Jim, enjoyed your presentation. I'd like to make a comment, and then I'd like you to comment on the comment. Okay,
So-
I think in the digital media, everybody says that how do we monetize, and that kind of a question has put everybody's knickers in a twist. I don't think it's entirely true. There are people who digitize, who monetize in the digital world. For example, people who sell all these devices. They're making a lot of money selling a lot of devices that can do a lot of things. Then there are the people who give connectivity. So your service providers, they're making a lot of money giving you internet connectivity, broadband, data plans, etc. So we are the guys in the room who have been left behind in the race because we are here with the content, and we are not only ones who are not making money. Everybody else is. In fact, what we do is fueling the entire digital industry. And being left behind in the race, we are kind of cannibalizing and killing each other by giving away content for free and then trying to figure out what exactly we can do, how can we monetize. So we put ourselves into this race for monetization by ourselves, and not recognizing the fact that the entire industry is based on so much of money being transferred. Digital, I'm saying, you're talking about Christmas and buying a tablet. That's a perfect example of how there's so much money in the digital world. Now, how do we, as content players, get a share of that? And how do we actually have a strategy which allows us, because if content generators all over the world decided one day, okay, we're going to ban putting content on the internet for a month, that's going to change the whole world. Because what are these people with all these devices going to do? What are the internet connectivity operators going to do if people are not going to access their websites? So I'm not saying that we can do that. It's too late, I guess. But a comment on how do you see this as a perspectivist? Because we seem to be looking at this whole industry as the guys who got left behind.
Okay. I mean, I think there's, and I know you're coming on to this later today. I mean, I think there's a big debate going on I think in just about every market about what the role of news is in society and how one ensures that there is a free press and two, an authoritative press. Because, you know, having to rely on bloggers and, you know, all these guys. I always say, you know, if you ever listen to talk radio, I don't know, you know, you get in a taxi and there's always some talk show on and there's people phoning in. I always suspect that 90% of the people who are phoning in are axe murderers. You know, yeah? And I mean, you hear them. You just think, thank God that person's nowhere near my children. But I have a horrible suspicion that a lot of what we get in blogs is merely axe murderers that can type, which is a qualification one up from, you know, wielding an axe. But so there is a debate to be had as to how news continues. But my suspicion is that society want a free press and are willing to pay for it. What they're not willing to pay for is 4 minutes a day, 8 times a month. And that's why I realize if I was in the UK I'd get arrested for saying this, that's why I say that the concept of a newsstand where within a country all the news media compete, and the word competition I'm told is extremely important, all newspapers compete within an environment where they can all charge. You know, if you take the UK, you know, in the 1990s, Murdoch dropped the price of the Times dramatically and increased sale. Now he's tried to introduce a paywall that has failed. You know, and the reason it's failed, I believe it's failed, and the fact that they don't tell me it hasn't, I think is interesting in itself. They've got far bigger problems. You know, their problem isn't the Times paywall; their problem's survival. But that, I think, is a solution that could work. And the great thing about that is that if you're in a competitive market, people can choose to go from one place to another. You can have a subscription system for all papers, and you've tried this in France. And that, I think, is a viable model. Also, if you solve the multiplier problem, the box that I was talking about, the advertising revenues will fly in. Flies maybe a bit, it'll enter.
Thank you, Jim. So for continuing the discussion, you have understood that better to invite Jim in a bar, but not always in the top of a hill. No, not always in the top of a hill. So, and I think, so you will have, again, we will give you the login and password. You will have all presentations, including Jim's presentation. So thank you very much for Jim. And we have this lunch with Jimmy Lai, so a very successful publisher here, first in Taiwan, now in Hong Kong. And so we have this lunch, and I'm asking you to be there at 1:45, because this afternoon we are exactly at the middle of the conference, because tomorrow we have the Editors Marketplace Day with startups presenting new concepts. So we are exactly at the middle, and this afternoon is really packed. So be there at 1:45. Thank you very much.